With the amount of great Assassin's Creed missions there are in the series, there's of course going to be quite a few missions that are not as great. I've made a video highlighting my favourite mission from each mainline Assassin's Creed game, and now if you cannot tell by now, it's time to do the complete opposite and talk about my least favourite mission. But before I begin though, I must say that this is purely my opinion. It's okay to disagree. I like seeing friendly discussions in the comments below. So yeah, without further ado, let's just get right into it. Starting off with Assassin's Creed 1. You know, out of every game in the series, I think this might be the easiest decision I've ever had to make. Assassin's Creed 1 had a lot of missions that felt quite repetitive, but I guess that's what you can expect from a 2007 game, so none of these missions can be classed as my least favourite. However, there's one particular mission out of them all that is by far the worst in this game, and I'm pretty sure you can agree with me on this. And that is the assassination of Sibrand. Out of all the assassinations in this game, the last thing you'd expect is to assassinate somebody on a boat. It doesn't really sound that terrible when you think about it, except for the fact that Altair does not know how to swim. Of course, there's a lot of other problems with this mission on top of that. The wooden posts in the water are so inadequately placed, and a simple misstep is one of the worst things that can happen to you in this mission. Assassinating Sibrand himself on the boat is actually the easiest thing about this mission. It's just getting to him which was so annoying. Knowing that Assassin's Creed 1 was made in 2007, the collision detection system was one of the most inconsistent features of the game, causing instances where Altair wouldn't stop himself when jumping off poles or just anything and simply slipping into the water. I think the reason Altair could not swim was actually explained somewhere in Assassin's Creed 2, where it was deemed as an animus glitch. So yeah, I guess that explanation voids any potential theories. Now for Assassin's Creed 2, and the mission I chose for this one is actually not a story mission, but rather a carnival minigame mission, and that is Capture the Flag. You see, this mission is one of the most frustrating missions in the entire game. The objective though is actually quite simple. You need to race your opponent to the flag in the center of the map, grab it and then bring it back to your starting position. However, the execution is anything but simple. When I played through this mission in my first ever playthrough, I'm pretty sure I was so close to just deleting the game at this time. The thing about this mission that made it so damn frustrating was that capturing the first two flags was so incredibly easy. It felt like the mission was going to be rather straightforward. That was until Ubisoft decided to program this third flag to capture such a pain in the ass. The opponent decides he's all of a sudden Barry Allen and runs at some ridiculous speed. You could still be on the rooftop and the opponent will have captured the flag from down below. I mean, just take a look at this. There's no way a human could ever run this fast. I eventually did manage to figure it out, but that was through learning the actual route of the mission. So in the end, the mission always ended 3-1, that one being because of how ridiculous the opponent's running speed is at the third capture. So trying to go for a 100% 3-0 was practically impossible. If I was to boot up Assassin's Creed 2 now and have a go at this Capture the Flag, I still think I'd struggle big time, mainly because of how long it's been, but also because of how fast the opponent is at one point. When it comes to missions that involve walking at very slow paces, whether that be tailing missions or escorting somebody, those are the missions I absolutely despise. And there's one particular mission in Brotherhood that follows this premise, which is called When in Rome. So the mission starts with Ezio disguising himself as a Roman guard, whilst holding a chest of money walking through the streets of Rome. The objective is fairly simple, it's just to lead the guards to the banker's location without being detected. Now the worst part about this is that there's no objective marker on your map, so you're pretty much walking blind. The only help that you got is the guards you've been walking with this whole time, but they just spout out some nonsense. Instead of actually helping us out and giving us directions, when you would go in the wrong direction, the guards will just taunt you, calling you a fool. However, when you head in the correct direction, the guards will offer positive remarks. How about some actual directions? That's the most frustrating thing. The whole point of walking with these guards is to lead us to the banker. But all we got was, I hope they let us go inside, or the route you're taking is very interesting. I mean, just hearing them speak is already agonizing, but the mission becomes even more hard with an optional objective to complete it within 3 minutes. This means you'd have to rush to the destination. However, you would need to be extra careful not to accidentally collide with an NPC, because if that happens, Ezio will drop the chest he's carrying. Overall, this mission is more frustrating than anything else. And like I said, any mission that involves slow walking for me is a big fat no, and this one especially is just pain. Now for Assassin's Creed Revelations. And this one is going to be a rather different type of mission. I'm not talking about playing as Ezio, but rather playing as Desmond. The Desmond journey missions in Revelations were pretty mixed for me. You see, there's the whole debate of whether the modern day segments in Assassin's Creed are even worth being in the series. I for one don't really mind. Well, except for these missions. When it comes to Desmond's journey, the lore side of it is rather nice to see, learning about Desmond's past memories. But the actual gameplay of these missions are quite possibly the second most boring piece of content I've ever played in Assassin's Creed. If you're wondering what number 1 is, you'll find out later in the video. The first person puzzles in these Desmond journey missions are not engaging whatsoever. The mechanic of placing blocks throughout the game feels out of place, almost as if it should be part of a different game altogether, featuring physics that are far from fun. It felt like I was playing a Minecraft minigame but with Assassin's Creed graphics. These missions did disappoint me because I felt like Ubisoft could have told Desmond's story in a different way that would have been a little more exciting rather than just first person puzzle stuff. The whole reason I endured through them is for Desmond's story. Moving on from the Ezio trilogy of games is now Assassin's Creed 3, and there's quite a handful of missions that I can recall that I didn't quite enjoy in the game. Just off the top of my head, there's the mission involving igniting the powder kegs of 3 big ships. There's also the fight mission where you need to break up a fight, but the control system for that mission is kind of weird. But the one mission I've deemed as the worst in this entire game is by far the Midnight Ride. This mission was a pain in the ass for many reasons. It's always the missions that at first seem quite straightforward that are truly the most frustrating. It starts off with Connor and Paul Revere riding on the same horse across the frontier. Having Paul Revere sit behind you on a horse and constantly scream his lungs out pointing directions was so tedious. It did not help at all that he'd often scream to the left whilst also pointing to the right. That's just the brilliance of Ubisoft Montreal, I guess. I don't know if you can tell, but the reasons I hated this mission are just like the reasons I hate the When in Rome mission in Brotherhood. There's something about getting directions from NPCs that didn't quite go well in Assassin's Creed. If you happen to ride in the wrong direction, Revere will not hesitate to call you out. As if that's not bad enough, there's a chance that Revere himself may get lost, which doesn't exactly make sense because he's the one giving the directions. So what's the plan when that happens? Well, you're left with no choice but to aimlessly explore the surroundings until Revere decides he has a brain again and regains his sense of direction. It's honestly quite amusing that this mission made it through production considering all the challenges it presents.
This way, Connor! Yes, this is exactly where we need to be. Go left up here. Excellent! We are right on course! Yes, this is exactly where we need to be. Yes! This is it! This is the way! Shut the f*** up, you cunt!
Now for Assassin's Creed Black Flag, and immediately what may come to all of our minds is the tailing missions, whether that be tailing the boat in the bayou or just tailing guards in general. But that's actually surprisingly not the worst mission in the game. It may be the worst thing in the game, but as a whole mission, I'd have to go with something quite different. So the mission I've chosen as my least favourite would be where you'd have to locate James Kidd on the island full of assassins. Now there's quite a few reasons I found this particular mission on my least favourite. The first one being how incredibly easy it was to get detected. The whole idea was to stay in bushes and sneak past the assassins at the perfect time without being detected. Of course, when I played this mission for the first time, I actually had no idea that you were able to put away your hidden blade and instead knock out the assassins, because if you managed to kill one of them, well, it would cause the mission to fail and you'd need to restart at the previous checkpoint. There's not exactly a lot of checkpoints either, so you could be 10 minutes in, and if you failed, you could have easily not got past the checkpoint yet. By far the worst part about this mission though was the fact that guards were able to walk into the bush that you're in, and you'd have like less than a second window of opportunity to knock him out, otherwise you'd get caught. Eventually I did manage to figure it out, I'll be honest though, and admit it did take me a very long time. The key was just simply patience, and I am the furthest thing from patient in video games. Now for Assassin's Creed Rogue, and this one to me, just like Assassin's Creed 1, is a no-brainer. In a game that was developed in a very short time and reused every asset from Black Flag, it surprisingly had some very good missions. But the one I absolutely despised was called Storm Fortress. Now this mission reminded me of a Black Flag mission, but on steroids. The whole objective of this mission is to confront a legendary ship in some very intense naval combat, which at first is rather difficult itself. I think I've attempted this mission at least over 10 times before I finally figured it out. I just cannot comprehend how physically or mechanically possible it was to succeed. The boss ship seemed to possess unlimited and relentless heavy shot, which never ceases. Despite the ship's massive size, it can move at such an incredible speed, defying all logic and physics of a ginormous ship. It's like the developers decided to just give this ship the speed and dexterity of a small brig, but 100 times the powerfulness of a man of war. And then when you're about to take it down, it summons 2 other ships. But the problem was the amount of damage taken from the Storm Fortress made fighting the other 2 ships so hard at times. So yeah, whilst I did enjoy Assassin's Creed Rogue's story, this particular mission however was definitely not it. When I played through Assassin's Creed Unity, I made it a point to play through all of the side activities before immersing myself in the Dead Kings DLC. This involved taking on the co-op missions, which I found rather enjoyable overall. However though, the final co-op mission that I tackled, known as the Tournament, became easily the most frustrating thing for me in this game. So, doing this mission with a group of people is relatively straightforward and easy. But doing it alone however, now that's a whole new can of worms. This mission puts your fighting abilities to the test and it feels like an incredibly demanding challenge. So in general, the combat mechanics are rather enjoyable in my opinion. However, when you find yourself confronted with a staggering number of 20 opponents all on your own, it becomes almost impossibly difficult. It might be slightly more manageable if you have all your legendary gear, but even then, relying solely on equipment feels incredibly unrealistic and pretty unfair. I guess the concept of the idea is great, but in my opinion, I felt like it was straight up ruined by terrible elements. It feels like a missed opportunity not to scale the mission difficulty based on the number of players that were involved. Perhaps reducing the number of enemies slightly could have made a big difference. And then there's the parkour part of the mission, and I'm not even going to go into that because that took me a long time. Assassin's Creed Syndicate. This game to me was quite underrated. While some of the missions were great, some were a bit meh. But I cannot really think of one particular mission that comes to mind that I'd consider straight up bad. I mean, the closest I have is probably the family politics mission. Now bear in mind, this mission is really easy when you're just playing the game as it is and moving on to the next chapter. But I often like the 100% missions in Assassin's Creed and this game was one of them. So this mission was given to us by Queen Victoria during the epilogue, and it revolves around the tedious task of stealing a royal carriage. However, what makes this particularly annoying is the requirement for 100% completion, which involves somehow stealing the actual carriage itself without even entering the courtyard where they're stored. I couldn't figure out for the life of me how we'd be able to steal a carriage without actually entering the location that it's stored in. I mean, that logic is just crazy to me. That's like saying ride a horse to this location. Oh, and the catch? You can't ride your horse. I had to look up a guide and I saw one where they mentioned startling the horses to the point where they'd flee the courtyard entirely, which would then make me chase the horse. But then there's the annoying guards all over the carriage which I had to avoid. What's even more frustrating is that the objective is to keep the actual carriage's health over 50%. So considering I was chasing a horse that was spooked and often kept crashing into lampposts and NPCs, it kept making the carriage's health lower and lower and lower. So yeah, it did take me quite a few tries to keep it above 50% just so I can 100% this mission. Now for Assassin's Creed Origins. And if I was to choose my favourite mission, I'd be here all day. But if I was to choose what my least favourite mission was, I'd have to go with the mission where you had to fight Septimius at the end of the game as Aya. Now don't get me wrong, I loved playing as Aya at times, but not here. Ubisoft should have allowed us to play as Bayek when taking on this story heavy boss because it felt like that would have made more sense. So in my New Game Plus playthrough on Nightmare difficulty, this mission with Aya felt like the worst thing ever. The thing is, Septimius was an enemy that had dual weapons with some ridiculous range on them, whilst we controlled Aya, who basically had no proper equipment. To make things a lot worse, they gave us some goddamn daggers. The 2 and 2 don't exactly add up. An enemy with insane range on dual wield weapons against tiny daggers that barely did any damage. You have to remember that this is New Game Plus on the hardest difficulty, so the damage was even more terrible. Aya herself during this fight barely healed up too, and since Septimius' attacks were practically over 1 bar of health each hit, this meant that I couldn't get hit maybe 2 or 3 times in quick succession or I'd be dead. So yeah, that's my least favourite mission in this game. It's not even just in New Game Plus where I found it to be the worst. I did not really enjoy the boss fight itself and it felt rather anticlimactic. Now for Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and I'm noticing a trend with these RPG games. It feels like the worst missions in each of these games are mythological or boss stuff rather than story related missions. It's funny because I went from tailing missions being the worst to now mythological boss fights. The change is kind of nuts. Anyway, for me, my least favourite mission in Assassin's Creed Odyssey is going to be the Medusa boss fight. Not only was this very unlike Assassin's Creed, it was also insanely hard. I do think this boss is actually the hardest boss in the entire series. So Medusa was located in a deep forest on the island of Lesbos. Funny name, right? Anyway, actually taking her on required so much planning because to me, you have to have all these overpowered abilities unlocked and fully upgraded because I felt like without these, I never really stood a chance against her. The annoying thing about this boss fight was you were so reliant on using your bow. Now I'm somebody that dislikes bow builds in RPG games because there's just no fun in spamming your bow constantly. The fight itself was something else. You had to hide from her at times, whilst also trying to take down her stone soldiers that she sends at you. It was only after taking down these soldiers, Medusa herself was able to take damage, and even then it's barely enough time to take her health down enough. That's not all, because she'd often go invisible, teleport, summon some sort of lightning attack, and also she turns into Superman, casting lasers out of her eyes. I feel like Ubisoft just said screw it, and added every possible worst feature about a boss they could have added. Now that I think about it, I know a few people that actually just gave up on the boss, and I can't exactly blame them for that. Assassin's Creed Valhalla felt like it had a lot of chore missions. There's 2 that instantly come to mind when I think of my least favourite missions in the game. The first one being those cairn stuff where you'd have to stack rocks on top of each other. Those were so pointless and offered nothing out of it. And the other one is the anomalies scattered throughout the world. Although they are not particularly classed as missions, I would certainly think that they are because of how tedious they felt. They were more like chores rather than enjoyable experiences. Instead of them entertaining me, they always felt like constant sources of frustration. Whenever I would see the next animus glitch in the world, I always knew what was coming. The design of these anomalies are also another reason why I'm not a fan of them. Oftentimes a slight misstep would punish you, and the margin for error is incredibly small. If you fell or made a mistake, the game often moves you back to a different location than your previous platform. And on the off chance that it did revert you to its last platform, it's just the whole process of it resetting was so inconsistent. As a result of this, you'd end up having to redo a significant portion of the light beams and even the timing based parkour sections, even though the game claims to have returned you to your last checkpoint. Having to repeat the same task over and over again due to a single error is far from enjoyable for me. Maybe you enjoyed these for some strange reason, and if you did enjoy them, comment below why you enjoyed them. I just can't see any type of reasoning that would justify anybody enjoying these anomalies. So there you have it, my least favourite missions in each Assassin's Creed game. Of course, this type of video is always going to be opinion based, so if you had something completely different to mine, just leave it down in the comments below. So yeah, if you did enjoy this type of video, be sure to subscribe and hit that like button, and I'll see you in the next one.